My name is Irene Carter. I'm 38 years old. And this is the story of how I found out my marriage was a performance, and how I rewrote the final act. It was a Wednesday. I remember that because Wednesdays were laundry days in our home. Predictable, comforting, like so much of the life I thought I had with Ryan. We lived in a quiet town outside Seattle, where the maple trees blushed bright red in autumn and neighbors waved from across neatly trimmed hedges. We'd lived in that house for 12 years. Built it together. Dreamed inside its walls. I thought it was our fortress. That afternoon, I was folding clothes fresh out of the dryer, still warm in my hands, and I walked into Ryan's office to leave them on his favorite brown leather chair. His office was always obsessively tidy. Immaculate. Not a single paper out of place. But that day, there it was. A white envelope on the desk. Centered. Unsealed. Staring at me like it had been waiting all along. At first, I froze. I hadn't meant to snoop. But something about the envelope, its placement, its perfection, felt off. Almost staged. My eyes locked on the neat, typed name on the front, Irene Carter. Not handwritten. Just those sterile, detached letters. Like a report filed by someone who didn't know me. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. Inside was a letterhead, legal. I saw the title in bold before my mind could process the rest, petition for divorce. Words jumped at me like blades, irreconcilable differences. Equitable division. No prior disclosure. But that wasn't the part that shattered me. It was the note clipped behind it. A post-it in Ryan's handwriting. Just 7 words. Send to attorney by Friday. Don't tell her. Don't tell her. I was the her. The woman who had spent 12 years picking him up after every failure, sitting beside him in ER waiting rooms, memorizing his father's eulogy when he couldn't get through the second line. And now I was just an obstacle. A loose end to be tied up neatly and discarded before the weekend. I stood there, frozen in the fading sunlight, the air too heavy to breathe. I placed the papers back exactly how I found them. Not a corner bent, not a smudge left behind. Then I stepped out and closed the door softly behind me. The sound of the latch clicking into place rang louder than a gunshot. I leaned against the hallway wall, heart thudding in my ears, bile rising in my throat, and something inside me, something too long buried beneath forgiveness, compromise, and second chances, finally woke up. This wasn't grief. Not yet. This was clarity. Cold. Sharp. A blade forged from betrayal. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I went into the kitchen. I opened the fridge and pulled out the ingredients he loved most. Fresh rosemary, lemon, golden potatoes, the chicken I'd thawed that morning. I seasoned every piece with precision, my hands no longer trembling. Dinner was ready by 6. The candles were lit. 2 glasses of red wine. Linen napkins folded like we were still in love. At 6:20, I heard his car pull into the driveway. The familiar purr of the engine. The squeak of the garage door. "I'm home, sweetheart," he called, like nothing had changed. I turned from the kitchen, smile practiced to perfection. "Go wash up. Dinner's ready." He smiled, kissed my cheek like he always had. He didn't see the tightness behind my eyes, the stillness of my body. He didn't know I had seen everything. We sat across from each other at the dinner table, the candlelight flickering between us. He complimented the chicken. "This is amazing," he said. "What's the occasion?" I shrugged, pouring him another glass of wine. I just felt like doing something special. For us. His eyes darted to the phone he'd left face down on the side table. The screen lit up once. Then again. I didn't have to check it. I had already seen the name in his emails, Allison Lee. He looked nervous. Like he wanted to reach for it but didn't dare. Like guilt was sitting at the table with us, whispering in his ear. I leaned in just slightly. You've seemed stressed lately, Ryan. Is something going on? He shook his head, too quickly. Just work. You know how it is. Of course, I said, sipping from my glass. Work. He changed the subject. Asked about the new neighbors. The garden. Anything to avoid the minefield I hadn't even laid for him, yet. I served him another helping of potatoes. He smiled like he still believed I was his unsuspecting wife. That I'd go to bed tonight, still clueless, while he edited a divorce petition behind closed doors. That night, he slept soundly. I didn't. I sat in the dark by the window, his laptop open in my lap. The password? Our wedding date, 0510. He hadn't even changed that. Emails. Messages. Attachments. Photos. The deeper I looked, the worse it got. I'm counting down the days until we can finally be together, she wrote. She won't suspect a thing, he'd replied. Irene always trusts too easily. I sat there for hours. Reading. Remembering. Realizing. My husband wasn't just leaving me. He had already left. He was just waiting for the paperwork to make it official. By the time the sun began to rise, something inside me had changed completely. Not broken. No. Hardened. I wasn't going to cry in front of him. I wasn't going to plead. I was going to let him hang himself with the very rope he'd spun behind my back. And when he thought he had it all lined up, the mistress, the lawyer, the lie, I'd be waiting. Not with a heart to break. But with a choice to give him. A choice he'd never forget. The next morning, I went about my routine exactly as I had every other Thursday for the past 12 years. I packed Ryan's lunch, ironed his favorite button-down shirt, even left a thermos of coffee by the door with a sticky note that read, "Drive safe. I love you." He kissed my cheek before leaving, murmured something about a team meeting. I smiled, waved him off. And the second the door closed behind him, I locked it. I didn't have time to fall apart. Instead, I opened my phone and called the number I had written down the night before, one given to me by an old friend from college who'd gone through a messy divorce of her own. The woman she'd hired? Diane Morrow. A shark in a suit. Smart, ruthless, compassionate to the wronged and brutal to the deceitful. I need a consultation, I said, voice calm and measured. Soon. Diane's assistant didn't ask why. She just said, "Can you be here by 1? I'll be early." I spent the next few hours printing everything. Emails, photos, transaction records, calendar screenshots from Ryan's phone that showed weekend conferences in the exact same cities where Allison Lee had been posting Instagram stories. When I arrived at Diane's office, I looked like every other polished suburban wife, clean lines, neutral tones, wedding ring still on. But inside, I was steel. Diane greeted me in a navy blazer and subtle heels, her handshake firm, her eyes sharp. "Tell me everything," she said. And I did. From the moment I found the envelope to the private emails to the recordings I'd discreetly begun making of phone calls and late-night whispers Ryan thought I couldn't hear. I handed over the printed evidence. She didn't flinch once as she flipped through it. "This is premeditated," she said, tapping the post-it he left on the divorce file. "He intended to blindside you. That gives us leverage." She began outlining steps. First, a financial analyst to track hidden funds. Second, file a petition of our own, one that included marital misconduct, which, if proven, could shift the financial settlement drastically in my favor. Third, stay silent. If he thinks you know, she warned, he'll change tactics. Let him keep thinking he's ahead. I nodded. Do you have access to his accounts? Shared bank accounts, yes. And I've already traced his consulting payments into a personal business account I never knew existed. Her eyebrows rose in approval. That's excellent. Most clients don't come in this prepared. I met her gaze. I wasn't supposed to see that envelope. But since I did, I refused to walk away with nothing. She smiled. Good. Because you won't. By the time I left her office, I didn't feel like a wife scorned. I felt like a woman planning her comeback. That night, Ryan came home late, claimed traffic was awful and that the office was overwhelmed. I made him dinner. He ate. Complimented me again. You've been in such a good mood lately, he said, smiling like a man who thought he still held the upper hand. I'm just feeling grateful, I replied softly. Inside, I could barely hear myself over the scream building behind my eyes. He had no idea I'd spent the day unmasking every lie he'd wrapped me in. No idea I had already found a financial expert, Mark Turner, who was combing through his investments and freelance payments for discrepancies. Mark had called me that afternoon after Diane forwarded him my files. His voice was low and even, but what he said next was a thunderclap. Mrs. Carter, your husband's been siphoning money from your joint accounts into 3 separate private ones for at least 9 months. I tightened my grip on the phone. Are they traceable? Absolutely. He's not as clever as he thinks. And he's made several mistakes. What kind of mistakes? Transferring directly from a shared account to a consulting expense account under his name, registered to a P.O. box in Tacoma. Which, by the way, is where Ms. Allison Lee's business is also registered. I didn't speak. I just took notes. Every detail mattered. You've got a strong case, Mrs. Carter. Possibly even enough for punitive damages if we pursue it right. Good, I said. Let's do that. Back at home, as I loaded the dishwasher, I watched Ryan scroll through his phone, smirking at something on the screen before locking it quickly. I knew that smirk. He thought he was winning. But the game had already changed. A few days later, I received the official report from Mark. Not only had Ryan transferred nearly $75,000 over the last year into his private accounts, but he'd also underreported that income to the IRS. Meaning, tax fraud. Diane lit up when I handed her the documents. This gives us even more power. If he refuses fair terms? We report this. Do we have proof? We have bank records, audit flags, and undeclared income. That's more than enough for the IRS to open an investigation. Which would, by the way, freeze his assets. I leaned back, my heart still heavy, but something deeper, quieter, growing inside me. Resolve. He wasn't going to leave me with a cheap apology and a generic divorce settlement. He was going to choose between public ruin or private surrender. And I was going to give him that choice when he least expected it. But first, I had one final move to make. I booked an appointment with a therapist. I needed someone to help me stay steady. Not because I was breaking, but because I was building something new, and I didn't want rage clouding the strategy one had so carefully planned. Her name was Dr. Rachel Keller. A quiet woman with kind eyes and no patience for sugarcoating. I sat on her couch, hands folded in my lap, and said, "My husband is having an affair. He's filed for divorce behind my back. But he doesn't know I know yet." She didn't look shocked. She only nodded. "And what do you want, Irene?" I thought for a moment. I want to walk out of this with everything I deserve. And I want him to feel it. Not with cruelty, but with consequences. Dr. Keller didn't tell me to forgive. Or forget. Or breathe. She simply said, "Then let's help you hold the line." That was the day I stopped mourning. And started preparing. The mask I wore grew lighter with each passing day, more natural in its performance, even as the truth beneath it sharpened like a blade. To Ryan, I was still the wife he thought he could quietly discard. But inside, I was transforming, turning into the woman he never imagined he'd have to face across a courtroom or negotiation table. It was a Tuesday evening when opportunity knocked, disguised as carelessness. Ryan came home early, something he hadn't done in months. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, his tie loosened. He dropped his bag by the door, muttered something about needing a drink, and headed straight for the liquor cabinet. I watched him from the kitchen as he poured himself a generous glass of whiskey, his go-to after a day that didn't go according to plan. He didn't notice me watching. That's when I slipped away, down to the garage. Earlier that week, I had hidden a small voice recorder beneath the seat of his car. It was triggered by sound and saved everything digitally. I hadn't touched it since placing it there, but now, I needed to know. In the quiet of the garage, I retrieved the device, tucked it into my robe pocket, and went back upstairs, heart pounding against my ribs. That night, while Ryan snored beside me, I plugged the recorder into my laptop. And listened. There were dozens of files. Most were mundane phone calls, radio static, ambient music, but then came the one that would seal everything. A woman's voice. Allison. I just wish you'd do it already, Ryan. She's not stupid. You said you'd send the papers weeks ago. I will, Ryan's voice answered, low and irritated. She hasn't caught on, I swear. I'm keeping things smooth so it all goes down easy. Smooth? Allison scoffed. You're sleeping next to your wife every night and calling me what, during lunch breaks? That's not smooth. That's cowardice. A pause. I told you, he snapped. It'll be done before Christmas. Just let me handle it. I paused the recording. My hands didn't tremble this time. I sent the audio file to Diane, along with a transcript. Her reply came quickly, that's the final nail. We'll draft our terms. This is going to end on your terms now, Irene. He has no way out. The next day, I met with Mark Turner again. We reviewed everything one last time, the financial discrepancies, the hidden accounts, the misreported earnings, and the voice recordings. The man who once controlled every penny of our shared life had unknowingly written his own downfall, one careless transaction at a time. I don't just want a clean break, I told Mark. I want justice. Not revenge. But I want him to know what he cost me. Mark nodded. He will. And we're going to do it the smart way. The plan was simple, present him with a choice so devastatingly clear, he'd have no room to play victim. Sign and surrender the terms quietly. Or watch the empire he'd built, his career, his reputation, his relationships, fall apart in front of his eyes. That weekend, I played the role of loving wife again. I made cinnamon pancakes, the kind he used to request when he was stressed. I even rubbed his shoulders while he pretended to read emails on the couch. Every part of me ached to shout the truth at him, but I waited. Because I knew what was coming. On Sunday night, he sat beside me with a strange expression on his face. I could sense it, the moment he was about to pull the trigger on the surprise he had crafted. Irene, he began, gently placing his hand over mine, I've been thinking, and I feel like we've grown apart. I tilted my head, like a woman blindsided. What do you mean? His eyes searched mine for signs of suspicion. When he found none, he softened his voice further. I think it's time we talked about separating. I didn't want to hurt you, but I think we've both known for a while. I let a silence fall between us. Then I whispered, are you sure? He nodded solemnly, the brave, noble husband pretending to suffer through this mutual decision. And that's when I stood up, walked to the desk, and pulled out the file Diane had prepared. I placed it in front of him. I'm glad you brought it up, Ryan, I said, my voice as gentle as a razor sliding across glass. Because I've been thinking too. He frowned, flipped the folder open, and then froze. The printed emails. The photos. The financial records. The transcribed recording. And finally, the revised divorce agreement, with terms far from what he'd expected. I would keep the house. Full ownership of our shared business. 50% of all assets, including those he had hidden. And a confidentiality clause, ensuring that if he didn't cooperate, the audio file and financial proof would go public. He looked up at me, color drained from his face. What the hell is this? I sat across from him, calm, composed. This is your choice, Ryan. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair over. You've been spying on me? No, I said simply. I've been protecting myself. Something you clearly forgot to do. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. I could fight this. I could drag this through court. I picked up my phone and opened my drafts folder. 3 unsent emails waited, one to the IRS, one to his employer, and one to his parents. You could, I said, showing him the screen. But you won't. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. Because he didn't. The Irene who once cried into a pillow while he claimed late nights at the office. She didn't live here anymore. He sat down again slowly, eyes glassy. You planned all this? You planned first, I answered. I just refused to let you win. He swallowed hard, flipping back to the signature page. What happens if I sign? You keep your job, your image, and the chance to start over quietly. I never speak of this again. Not to your family. Not to anyone. And if I don't? I leaned in slightly. Then you lose everything. He looked down at the pen. Then at me. And for the first time in years, he seemed afraid. That night, he didn't sleep. And for once, I did. Ryan signed the papers 2 days later. I found him at the kitchen table, his shoulders slumped, the file open before him. His eyes were red, and the pen in his hand trembled slightly as he scrawled his name across the final signature line. When he looked up at me, there was no more arrogance in his face. Just defeat. I signed it, he said, voice hollow. Is that what you wanted? I met his gaze, calm. No. I wanted a marriage. But you made another choice. I just followed your lead. He said nothing. Just stared at the countertop like he didn't recognize it anymore, like the granite he once insisted we pick together now felt foreign under his skin. I took the file, double-checked each signature, and then placed it in the sealed envelope Diane had given me. I'll deliver it today, I said. You'll receive confirmation through your attorney. He nodded once. What happens now? I walked to the window, pulling the curtain back slightly. Outside, the garden was blooming. Spring had crept in quietly while everything else had fallen apart. Now, I said softly, I reclaim what you tried to steal. That afternoon, Diane filed the paperwork with the court. The agreement was airtight. Every clause, every protection, every advantage was built into it. There would be no appeals, no disputes. Ryan's lawyer didn't even bother objecting. Diane had made it clear that if they challenged anything, the evidence would become public record. And Ryan couldn't afford that. He worked in finance, an executive consultant with a pristine image. One whiff of tax evasion or infidelity splashed across court documents, and he'd be finished. Diane had ensured that our silent threat would speak volumes. By the end of the week, the judge had granted preliminary approval. The house was mine. The company was mine. Half the assets were mine, including the investment account Ryan had tried to hide under a dummy LLC. All of it, mine. I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I just felt still. Not numb, not bitter, just a quiet, rooted peace. Like standing in the eye of a storm I'd finally walked out of. Ryan moved out 3 days later. He didn't fight it. He didn't try to argue for time or space. He packed 2 suitcases, took the files he needed for work, and left his key on the kitchen counter. Irene, he said before he left, I know it's too late, but... I'm sorry. I nodded. You should be. But not for me, for yourself. He lingered, maybe hoping for a shred of kindness, a flicker of what used to be. But I had none to give. And I didn't owe him any. After the door closed, I stood in the foyer for a long time. The silence was new. Heavy. Honest. And for the first time in months, I allowed myself to cry, not from pain, but from release. 12 years of a life I thought was real had ended. And now I was standing on the threshold of something else entirely, my own life. The first thing I did was paint over the cold gray walls Ryan had loved so much. He used to say muted tones made a house feel elegant. I always thought they made it feel lifeless. I painted the living room a warm olive green. The kitchen, a buttery yellow that glowed with the morning sun. I replaced the stiff white curtains with sheer ones that let the breeze in. I tore up the flowerless shrubs he once called low maintenance and planted wild daisies and lavender instead. Little by little, the house stopped feeling like ours. And started feeling like mine. The business we had started together, originally just a boutique consulting firm, was something he had lost interest in years ago. I'd been the one maintaining the client relationships, managing the contracts, running the back-end operations. Ryan used to joke that it was cute that I treated it like a real company. Now, I made it one. I rebranded the company under my name. Hired 2 young, brilliant women who'd just graduated from UW and gave them opportunities one wished someone had given me at their age. We grew faster in 6 months than we had in the previous 5 years. Clients who had once worked with us because of Ryan now praised the new direction and clear leadership. They didn't know that the leadership had always been me. They were just finally seeing it. And then one day, as I sat at my desk reviewing new partnership proposals, I got a message from Diane. It's final. Congratulations. I leaned back in my chair. 12 years of marriage. A home. A company. Betrayal. Deceit. The quiet warfare of a man who thought he could outmaneuver me. And it was over. That night, I poured a glass of wine and sat on the porch swing I'd installed myself. The air was soft. The stars scattered freely above the maple trees that had turned green again. I thought about the Irene who had stood frozen in that office months ago, staring at an envelope with her name on it and the words "Don't tell her." That woman was gone. In her place sat someone rebuilt from the ground up. Not harder. Just clearer. Wiser. Stronger. And unafraid. Then, just as I took a sip of wine, my phone buzzed. A name I hadn't seen in weeks. Ryan. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I picked up. Hello? His voice was quiet. Tired. Hi, Irene. I know this might be the last thing you want, but I was hoping we could talk. About what? I've been thinking about everything. And I realized. I gave up something I didn't understand how to value. I said nothing. I miss you. Not out of guilt. Out of regret. Real regret. I thought there was something better waiting. But there wasn't. I let a long silence stretch between us. And then I answered, softly but clearly. Ryan, you were right about one thing. There was something better waiting. I paused. But it wasn't a woman. Or a new life. It was me. The version of me that finally stopped waiting for someone to choose her. He didn't speak. Not a word. And then I ended the call. Not in anger. In peace. A week passed after that call. Ryan didn't reach out again. And I didn't expect him to. Not because he didn't have more to say, but because he finally realized I was no longer the woman who would listen. I wasn't angry anymore. I had shed the need for revenge. What I carried now was ownership of my choices, my healing, my future. Still, it wasn't easy. Healing never is. Some mornings, I would wake to sunlight pouring into the bedroom and feel that hollow ache, the one that lingers when a piece of your life dies, even if it was toxic. Grief doesn't always show up dressed like sadness. Sometimes it hides in the quiet, in the small rituals left behind, the way he used to steal the covers, the sound of his razor in the bathroom, the ghost of his voice humming off-key in the shower. But I let myself feel it. Fully. And then I moved forward. I took a weekend trip alone to a coastal cabin just north of the Olympic Peninsula. A place we'd once visited together. Except this time, it was mine alone. I brought books, soft music, good wine. I walked on the shoreline barefoot, letting the icy waves touch my ankles and remind me that I was still here, still strong, still alive. On the third day, I found myself journaling for the first time in years. Not just about Ryan. About me. The dreams I'd buried in order to make his shine. The things I'd given up quietly, job offers, travel plans, friends I stopped calling because he didn't like them. And as I wrote, something shifted. It wasn't just healing. It was reclamation. When I returned home, I made changes. Big ones. I enrolled in a part-time graduate program for design, a dream I'd put on the shelf over a decade ago. Not because I needed a new job, but because I wanted to learn something for me. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't have to ask permission. I didn't have to compromise. The business continued to grow. The house transformed more with each season. I had a small bench swing installed on the front porch. I replaced the sharp-edged kitchen table Ryan had chosen with a round wooden one that felt warm, communal, real. I painted the front door a deep navy and added a brass knocker in the shape of a maple leaf. Neighbors began noticing. "You've really made this place beautiful," one of them said one afternoon as I was planting tulip bulbs. I smiled. It finally feels like mine. But perhaps the most surprising part of life after Ryan was this: I didn't become bitter. I didn't lose faith in love. I saw more clearly what love wasn't. And I promised myself, never again will I settle for someone who sees my loyalty as leverage. Then, one evening in early summer, I received a letter. A plain envelope. No return address. But the handwriting was unmistakable. Ryan. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you," it began. "But I want to thank you. Not for what you gave me in our marriage, though that was more than I ever deserved. I want to thank you for the way you ended it, with dignity I didn't earn, and strength I'll probably never understand." He went on to say that he'd resigned from his job, taken a consulting position overseas, and planned to leave the country for at least a year. To learn how to be a better man, even if it's too late. At the bottom, he added, "I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just peace." I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer I rarely opened, and sat by the window. Forgiveness, I had already granted, quietly, for myself. Peace, I had already claimed. I didn't need his apology. But I was grateful, in a strange way, for his failure. Because without it, I may never have remembered who I was. A few weeks later, Diane invited me to a women's networking event in Seattle. She said she thought it'd be good for me, to meet others, to step into rooms I once didn't believe I belonged in. I went, unsure of what to expect. And that's when I met Elise. She was a creative director for a growing interior design firm. Warm, funny, sharp as glass. We talked for over an hour about everything from business strategy to why certain colors make people feel safe. She asked about my house, and I showed her pictures. She studied each one with real interest. "You've got an eye," she said. "Ever considered consulting?" I blinked. Me? I mean, I'm still just learning. "No," she said firmly. "You're building. And you have taste. I'd love to bring you in on a few freelance projects." That was the first time I considered that maybe, just maybe, this new chapter wasn't about starting over. It was about expansion. About stepping into rooms not just as someone who survived betrayal, but as someone who thrived because of it. I told her yes. And I meant it. Elise wasn't bluffing. Within 2 weeks, she invited me to join a consultation on a mid-century remodel project overlooking Lake Washington. It was the kind of sleek, ambitious home that used to intimidate me: glass walls, imported fixtures, custom art on every surface. But as I walked through the space, Elise watched me carefully. "What do you see?" she asked. I paused, taking it in. "The layout's perfect for drama, but the tones are emotionally flat," I said honestly. "It needs texture. Something lived in. Right now it feels like a showpiece, not a sanctuary." Her eyebrows lifted. She smiled. Exactly what I was thinking. That afternoon, Elise introduced me to her team. And by the end of the month, I had officially joined the firm as a freelance design consultant for high-end projects with a human touch. It was surreal. The same woman who had once organized her life around Ryan's calendar and dry cleaning was now standing in conference rooms, presenting mood boards, approving marble samples, and earning her own contracts. Not just surviving, flourishing. And people noticed. Even my parents, who had always tiptoed around the divorce with careful silences and polite avoidance, invited me over for dinner one Sunday. My mother pulled me into a long hug. "You seem different," she said, searching my face. "Lighter." "I am," I replied simply. "It turns out being alone isn't the same as being lonely." My father, never one for emotional expression, reached over during dinner and placed a hand over mine. "You did the right thing, Irene. Even if it took everything." I squeezed his fingers gently. It gave everything back. As summer approached, I hosted a small garden party at my home, something Ryan never would have tolerated. Too loud, too much effort, too many people in his space. But this wasn't his space anymore. And I wasn't catering to anyone's comfort but my own. Friends came. Clients showed up. Elise brought her partner, who immediately offered me another project in Spokane. Music floated through the air, and laughter echoed from the back patio where fairy lights glowed beneath the trees. I wore a flowing blue dress, the color of calm oceans, and walked barefoot through the grass, glass of wine in hand. In that moment, I didn't feel like someone who had rebuilt her life. I felt like someone who had finally begun living it. And then, as twilight deepened, I saw a figure standing by the front gate. Ryan. He looked older. Not just in appearance, but in posture. He was dressed casually, no tie, no briefcase, just a man carrying something he couldn't name anymore. For a second, I debated turning him away. This was my peace. My party. My new world. But something inside me, perhaps closure, nudged gently. I walked to the gate and opened it halfway. "Hi," I said. He nodded, eyes soft. "I won't stay. I wanted to see it." "See what?" He glanced behind me, toward the laughter, the lights, the people moving easily through the space I'd transformed. "This. What you built. Without me." I stood silently. He cleared his throat. "I thought you'd disappear after the divorce. Shrink. Fade." He looked up at me, shame painted across every line on his face. "But you didn't." "No," I said. "I grew." He reached into his coat pocket and handed me a small box. I hesitated, but took it. Inside was my wedding ring. Polished. Gleaming. Useless now. "I kept it," he murmured. "For too long. Thought maybe, if I held on to it, I could hold on to something of who we were." I looked at it one last time, then closed the box. "You're not the only one who lost something, Ryan," I said quietly. "But some things, some people, were not meant to keep." He nodded. "I know." I handed the box back. I don't need it anymore, I said. You do what you want with it. He held it like it was heavier than gold. Then looked at me, not as someone he once possessed, but someone he had finally released. You turned the wreckage into something beautiful, he said. No, I corrected softly. I was always beautiful. I just stopped dimming myself for someone else's comfort. He didn't argue. He turned to leave, pausing once at the gate. I'm glad you found peace. I found myself, I replied. Peace followed. As he disappeared into the shadows of the street, I felt no ache, no longing. Only lightness. That night, I returned to the party, barefoot and laughing. Whole. It's strange, the moment you realize a story has truly ended. Not with a bang. Not with a final argument or some poetic line of closure. But with stillness. With laughter at a garden party. With clean sheets on a bed no longer shared. With a heart that beats calmly when you see the man who once betrayed it. That summer passed like a song, gentle, sun-warmed, unhurried. I worked on 3 new design projects, taught a weekend course for local women looking to break into the consulting space, and even hosted my first solo art exhibit at a downtown gallery. A collection of small abstract works titled Reclamation. Every brushstroke was a piece of the journey I hadn't yet put into words. One canvas, a swirl of red, blue, and gold, caught the attention of a woman who stood staring at it for over 10 minutes. When I walked over to check on her, she turned and smiled. I don't know what this is supposed to be, she said softly, but it feels like heartbreak turning into fire. I smiled. That's exactly what it is. She bought it. Later that night, as I sat on the floor of my bedroom, toes curled against the hardwood, I finally allowed myself to look back one last time. Not with pain. Not with longing. Just acknowledgement. Ryan had tried to take everything quietly, my security, my trust, my peace. But in trying to erase me, he gave me the gift of rediscovering myself. And now? I no longer lived in his shadow. I no longer mistook betrayal for miscommunication. I no longer gave people the benefit of the doubt when what they really deserved was a locked door. I was 38. Independent. Respected in my field. Healing. Empowered. And finally, deeply, wholly happy. One evening, as golden light spilled into the kitchen and soft music played from a Bluetooth speaker tucked near the sink, I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection of the glass cabinet door. Hair up, paint under my fingernails, loose linen shirt half buttoned, wine glass in hand. And for the first time in a very long time, I said out loud. You're doing okay, Irene. You really are. The next morning, I received an email from a national design publication. They'd seen photos of one of my recent remodels and wanted to feature it in their fall issue. A profile of me, my journey, and my new business. Your story's inspiring, the editor wrote. More women need to hear it. I stared at the screen for a long time, my throat tight, not with sadness, but with something deeper. Gratitude. Not for the pain. But for the awakening that came after. So I said yes. The piece was published 3 weeks later, and it opened with a line I'll never forget. Irene Carter didn't just survive her divorce, she transformed it into the foundation of her second act. The article went viral. Women from across the country messaged me, some whispering about their own quiet heartbreaks, others shouting their victories. I read every message. I responded to every single one. Because I had been the woman afraid to open the envelope. I had been the woman quietly cooking dinner for a man already halfway out the door. And now, I was the woman showing others what life looks like when you take your power back. One evening, I stood on the back porch, the soft hum of crickets in the distance, the air thick with summer. A younger version of me might have asked, what's next? But the woman I am now? She doesn't rush. She breathes. She lets life unfold. Betrayal breaks something inside you, but it also reveals who you are when no one else is looking. For Irene, being blindsided by her husband wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a life where she made the rules, owned her truth, and chose herself over and over again. Sometimes, the people we trust the most will hurt us the deepest. But if we hold the line, stand in our truth, and refuse to fold, we don't just survive. We rise. Thank you for watching this story on Revenge Echoes. If Irene's journey spoke to something inside you, tell us in the comments, what would you do if you were in her place? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real, emotional stories of strength, justice, and the comeback no one saw coming.